Hi, today we'll create grass using Forest Pack Scatter. This is an additional plugin to install in 3D Max. You can download it on i2soft.com. And by the way, you can get away with a free version with limited functionality. Forest Pack is the best scatter, which gives great scattering opportunities. And by the way, there are so many of them that I can't tell you about all the opportunities of this scatter in this video. So instead, I'll cover the main ones. So let's get straight to the point. I'll create this wild grass with stones. Small grass will be mixed up with taller one. It will grow in bunches. So let's do it. So I want to create a multi-layer scatter, first of all. And it will consist of 4 layers. The first layer is small grass composed of clover, ribwort, and other small plants. The next layer is a bit taller grass, slightly withered, dark. The third layer is even taller grass, a finishing layer, so to say. And the fourth layer is the stones. They'll be scattered over the grass surface, some stones here and there, and I think it will look awesome. Why do I do different forest pack scatters? Because it's more convenient to set, and we can even out density for every layer, thin out some plants. So to avoid lumping together, I divide it into 4 layers. So let's create the first layer. When you install Forest Pack, it's usually done using exe file. I'll show you how it looks like. Okay, this is forestpackpro.exe. Follow the installation prompts and it will install in your 3D Max. When you first start, you'll see a menu with the FP button that is Forest Pack. Click it and create an icon. You can do it in the icon mode. Let's name the first layer Wild Grass. Let's set this yellow color. And let's take a look at the settings. The general scroll is not very interesting to us. You can copy settings and move some other forest packs. We won't need it now. Next, the geometry section. Here we add objects, which will distribute over the surface. And know that I'm doing it in a separate scene and not in our working scene. With a forest cabin, because it's easier to set up Forest Pack for this complex grass using a small scene with a small area of landscape, and then just move it to the main scene. So this is very helpful for those who have weak PCs. You set up a small scene and then you just move it and you're doing well. You don't have to suffer in a large scene when everything's lagging. That's not comfortable. So, okay, we can add plants using this plus icon. Click our plants and they're added. But clicking plus every time is inconvenient. Let me delete all this by clicking the cross. Now we'll select all of this. Then we go to the isolation mode, switch to Forest Pack, and by clicking this list button, add our plants. This is more convenient. Okay, here they are. We can set the same color to them. It's important at some points so that everything displays in the same way. When we scatter grass, it's better to make one color. I usually make categories. For example, here's a ribwort. We select it, these 4 plants, and set the same color. The color is very important. So we'll be able to set up our forest pack later. I'll tell you about it later. Now let's pick dark green and set it. Set this blue color to this type of plant. This red one to these two remaining plants. Colors basically don't matter. The main thing is that you understand which type of plant corresponds to which color. We can set the scale of our object, increase or reduce it. Let's assign the surface. Leave isolation mode and we'll figure out how it works in the interactive. Go to the surfaces, scroll, and assign it to our surface. Nothing appears now because we need to go to the area section and check this on box. Nothing has changed because there's a limit to the number of objects. There are probably too many now. We can either increase this value in the distribution section, set it to 20,000, or go to the display section and increase the max items value. Let's set it to 8. Nothing. Alright, if some scatter doesn't display, you may go to this section in the toolbar and all your forest packs will display. Check the box and everything will display then. My box wasn't checked, that's why the scatter didn't enable when changing parameters. Close this window. Just know about this feature. Now I'll run interactive and we'll sort out the parameters. Alright, let's zoom in and see what we've got. Now there's not much grass, that's why we go to the distribution section and set up the density parameter. We can also set a pattern based on which grass will distribute. There's some presets here. For example, dense means a denser option. If we pick full, we'll have a filling without any gaps between our plants. So let's set density to 10,000. This is the density of our plants and see what we get. Now it's generally good, but I'd like to make it not so even. They're wild plants after all. So that's why let's pick a map. Let's keep it as is, or maybe this map. Generally doesn't matter. Choose what you like. Then we can decrease density a little, because the lower the value, the denser the plants will seed. We essentially decrease the tiling of the texture which is applied to the map. Let's set it to 5,000 actually. And we can see the recurring pattern in the interactive. All in all, it looks nice. We need to avoid dense planting of grass everywhere. We need some bold patches, so as the ground is slightly seen here and there. I can't consistently tell you about all parameters and setups, and sometimes I have to leap. Let me continue. Open the geometry scroll. There's the scale parameter. We can adjust the scale of a separate unit or a part of the object selected. Let's reduce it, set it to 90, and our plants, which we selected, became smaller. Let's set it to 50. Okay, small bunches of grass. Now we return the value to 100. Now, next parameter is probability. It's responsible for how often some or other kinds of plants occur in our list. Now the value is 100. It means that they occur in our scatter in equal numbers relative to each other. But if we change the probability value of a plant, its frequency will be much rarer. We can also adjust the number of objects in our geometry list, but we won't change it now. That's not so important. Let's keep it 100 everywhere. Now this global scale parameter, if we want to decrease all the categories of our plants to a certain scale, we set the required value here, just so you know. Alright, so we're done with geometry section. Let's switch to the area section, a very interesting section. Here we can enable or disable our scatter using the on button. Okay, next I'll tell you about other parameters. The parameters below are not important for our task, so I'll tell you about the functions of these buttons using which we can control the distribution of our scatter. For example, in the last lesson, we did a spline limited area so that nothing distributes in this area. Select forest pack, pick this icon in the area scroll, click our spline, and now nothing happened because the include mode is selected and we need to enable exclude. After that, a spot will appear where scatter won't distribute plants. Let's delete it and consider the next function. So I create an object, for example, a box, check renderable so that it's unseen, and specify this object in the second tab. And an empty square appears in the interactive where plants don't grow. Delete it. Using the next icon, we can exclude some other forest pack. The next tab is the brush sign, a very interesting function. Let me disable our scatter for now. Assign this brush and draw in the include mode. Plants start appearing where I drew that. There are settings for this brush. Here we can set up different parameters, but the main parameter I want to mention is the brush max size. Increase it and we can draw like this where we need plants. This is a great thing, which how scatter lacks, and it's very convenient. Disable scatter now, and let's say we need to delete grass somewhere. So we enable exclude mode, enable our brush, and draw where we need to remove grass. It's very convenient. I often use this brush. By selecting the neighboring icon, we can actually erase the brush and bring back plants in these places. So generally that's all about this section. The rest of the parameters are not so important right now. So now let's switch to the next section, distribution. Previously I showed you that you can select a map to have a chaotic nature when distributing plants. We may load any mask in the map slot. The density parameter adjusts the density of our pattern. I set a lower value and we'll see that density of plants decreased. We can see some repeats of this pattern. Again, other settings in this section are not interesting to us. Here's an interesting setting called cluster. So right now, the plants were arranged in a random way relative to each other. So if we enable cluster, our plants will be divided into categories, into clusters. And in the size slot, we set the size of our cluster. Now it's too big, 20,000. Let's set it to 5,000. And we have such multicolored areas where only the plant type we have indicated grows. That's why, as I said, it's very important that plants differ by color. We have one type of plant highlighted in purple, another type in green, third type some other color. Now they're divided into clusters. And this cluster of plants of the same type grows, and this another, and so on. So that's a very helpful function because it imitates how plants grow in nature. So they grow in such clusters indeed. Let me zoom in and tell you about cluster settings in more detail. Let's say we're not happy with this regular geometrical shape of clusters. We can set up the work of clusters. The roughness parameter is responsible for the penetration of one cluster into another. Let's set it to 40%. Next, blurry edge parameter is responsible for the blurring of cluster boundaries. So one type of plant begins to enter another. Let's set it to 42. And the noise parameter, thanks to which plants from one cluster appear in the middle of another cluster. Set it to 20%. Now we don't have clear boundaries of clusters, just like in real life. And of course, clear boundaries don't exist. But there's a certain cluster nature in the plants, so generally it looks nice. We can also enable collisions. I talked about it in the first lesson about trees. Now we don't need it. Next, go to the items editor section. We don't need this either. The only thing I mentioned is that if we activate this setting, we'll be able to move plants or trees the way we need. If we want to move a little, change a separate plant or tree, then we can do it with this button. The camera section is also interesting. It allows us to limit the scatter distribution relative to the camera. So let me create a camera and show it to you. So for example, we have such camera. We go to Forest Pack. Assign our camera in this slot. Enable limit to visibility in viewport IR. Here we can restrict our plants. Set it to 1000. That's enough. And I'll start increasing it now. Doesn't work that way. Let me switch to view from cameras. So I'll go up a bit and see how it works from above. As the distance from the camera increases, the scatter should start to decrease. So we can keep this limitation of the scatter spread. We can blur these edges here or make them rough. The black offset parameter is what does it. We need it to save computer resources. If we're not happy with too many plants around, we can limit the scatter under the camera. And we won't have this grass outside the camera. But when we switch to another camera, we can do this by checking the Use Current Camera box. And then the grass will appear again. This is a very convenient function. In fact, the same as the house scatter I told you about. The shadows section is not of particular interest to us. The next section is surfaces. There's an interesting direction parameter here. Now we have plants directed slightly upwards, but we can enable the direction of grass along the normal. Usually the grass grows this way. It doesn't stretch strictly up, it grows along the bands of ground. The remaining parameter in this section are not interesting to us right now. The next tab is transform. This section allows you to randomize plants. Now you can see the repeatability of plants. There is no random rotation, and we can set it up right here. Very convenient. You can just check the boxes. The parameters of randomness are already set, and we don't need to change anything. We just enable a random shift, and our plants move a bit relative to each other. Then the random rotation checkbox and the plants rotated randomly along the z-axis. They also turn a little along other axes. So we can enable random scale, and as a result, some plants become smaller, some bigger, and this created randomness. And there's obvious repeatability in the interactive. Let's disable camera and limit visible, we don't need it. We need the plants to spread over the entire area. Okay, now we close transform section, we don't need the rest of the tabs. Let's consider only the display section. Here we can enable the scatter display in the viewport, or a point cloud as it is now, or a proxy. We can select pyramids, planes, boxes, and so on. Adaptive mode so that the geometry is visible, but we don't need it now. Let's choose a point cloud, and let's keep it that way. Next, in the render section, you can enable the mesh of proxy display. In proxy, you can select boxes, planes, and pyramids. This is to see how the scatter is set up, and if you have a weak PC, it will not be so resource consuming. So generally, I told you about the main forest packs in a nutshell, of course, because if I talk about all the functions of the forest pack, then we'll need a separate course for that. So I've talked about the main things using which you can set up most scatters. I've covered the simplest functions. Let's move on to the setup of the next layer of our forest pack. I now stop the interactive, we will set up a new layer and see what we get. Let's create a new forest pack and name it. Now select the next type of grass. Let's go to isolation mode. And let's load all these 3D models. Let's set some colors in the same way. We have two groups here. We'll now change the rest of the settings. Exit isolation mode, assign to the surface, and see how the new forest pack layer will spread. I recommend you always checkmark the auto box so that everything automatically updates if you change something. If there's no update, then you need to click this reboot button. So now we need to see if we have a check mark in the forest lister. If the next forest pack hasn't appeared, you need to click the button at the top right. Here you can see if the forest pack is loaded or if there are any problems. If there are problems, these will be a yellow or red circle. By clicking the icon, we can see what's the problem. Now there's an error because the area parameters is not enabled, so go to the area section and checkmark the on box. After that, our scatter will appear. Now let's set it up. First of all, set direction to normal, set up transform, and checkmark these boxes. Go to the distribution parameter. In this case, it's an important parameter. Let's choose an interesting distribution map, for example, this one. And so here we'll set up density. It's better to adjust density in the interactive. So let's set it to 7000 for now and enable the cluster mode. Let's make 4000 size and set roughness to 3%. And blurry age 30 and noise 20%. Now let's see how it looks in the interactive. Let's make the cluster smaller, start the interactive now. And it's on. And it looks good. Let's take a closer look if we need to increase density. And I like how it looks. We have high tufts of grass. There are bald patches where you can see the lower grass, and there are even bald patches where the ground is visible. Great, that's exactly wild terrain. Let me stop interactive and make the next layer. It's pretty quick and easy to do. Isolate the new type of species and add them. But first let's name our forest back. Then divide our types of plants by colors. We can get colors from color ID, just copy and paste so that not to bother with it. Let's merge these plants into one type. Each type of plant is not required to create its own cluster. You can just combine high with high so that they form clusters and combine some small plants with other small ones. Doesn't matter if a cluster is made of one type only. Now let's have 3 clusters. Let's connect the surface along which we'll distribute plants. Go to surface. Check the auto box. Switch direction to normal. Make sure to enable on the areas section. Now, don't set high distribution to avoid too dense layer, and so it doesn't obstruct lower layers. It's a wild terrain after all. So let's pick an interesting pattern. Not so dense. Maybe this one, with bald patches. Let's set size to 8,000. Enable cluster. The cluster size is 4,000 millimeters. Roughness and blurry edge 30. Noise 20. Enable transform. Great. In general, it's okay. Let's see what we get in the interactive and create the last layer. So this is our result obtained. Here are areas with tall grass. You can see the grass of the lowest level somewhere, and somewhere you can see the grass of the second layer. Very cool, very realistic. Just the way it is in the wild. The only thing is maybe we can do another pattern in the third layer in the distribution section. So let's pick another one. Let's see what fits better. Because now it's very dense planting. I like this option with small spots. Looks nice. Okay, the last layer remains. The last layer is just stones. Really easy. Name it rock. Now we add these stones. We can do it in one color so that it's easy to distinguish them. We won't create clustering. Connect the surface. Exit isolation mode. We can enable normal, but it doesn't matter much. check mark the area section, and the stones have appeared. Now we need to set randomness and correct distribution. Let's make a map with slight randomness, maybe with some spots. Set density to maybe 6,000. Although we're getting a very rocky surface, let's increase it to 15,000 to have fewer stones. And we can set occlusion so that the stones don't enter into each other so much. Set it to 50%. This should be enough. So let's go to transform and check boxes. Well done. The only thing is that now the stones are lowered and there's nothing to worry about, but I'll show you how to raise them slightly. There's Z offset setting, so offset along the Z axis. We can raise them over the surface. Let's raise them by 100 millimeters. 100's too much, maybe 50. Now, I don't like that our grass grows through stones, specifically high grass. And that's why we go to the layer with high grass, which we've set up. That's the third layer. So we'll go to the Areas tab and we'll use Exclusion from Forest Pack. So I'll click this button and now we need to specify stones. Okay, great. Now plants won't grow through these stones. By the way, you can do the same thing in the second layer. And in the first layer is with short grass. That's why it won't grow through stones. Go to the area section and specify the forest pack. And now our stones will look naturally. It won't seem that some plants grow through them. Let's run interactive and check our result. That's the result we have. Stones appeared in some areas, grass grows somewhere. I think there are a lot of stones now. They're piled on each other in heaps. Let's fix that. How can we do it? We can change the pattern in the distribution section. Let's pick not so much of a dense pattern. There were some. I'm okay with this one. We can decrease density a little to have fewer stones. Let's take a look at the reference actually. Now, of course, there are big stones, but we don't need big ones. Areas with small stones are important to us now. So I'm okay with this result. There are a few stones, high grass. Let's see what it looks like in a close-up. Let's go to camera view. Raise a little. We have great grass. I think it's very natural, a true wild grass. Now we need to move this asset to our scene. As a first step, I save this file because it may be useful for other projects, so that we can just put this whole area into the scene and reassign surfaces. So we just save it now, but before that, turn off the lighting that is set up here so that it doesn't move to another scene. So I remove the lighting and save it. All right, now we need to move it to another scene. We can delete the camera also so that it doesn't interfere with us. Select all and save using the copy to script. Let's paste it into the last slot. That's it. Now I load our scene with xref, and there we'll put this grass. I pause the recording and come back when it loads. So the stage opens. Let's load our grass. The grass is loaded. Let's move it here. Now here's a critical moment. Before connecting the grass, we'll make a blank so that the grass doesn't spread everywhere over the entire surface. Since it loads the computer, we limit its distribution with splines. So let's create a spline. We don't have a camera behind the house, so we can limit just there will be no grass scene. All right. Now, if necessary, we can adjust the spline size later. And we need to circle the spline along the shape of our house so that grass doesn't grow through the house. Now let's combine these two splines. Like this. And now the grass will grow only inside this spline. If I switch to the isolation mode, the grass will be in this contour. It doesn't matter how high the spline's located. Let's go to our list and connect layers and steps. Now we connect the first slot and so on. Now go to Surfaces section, delete the plane, and assign this surface. Okay, the grass already appeared, and now we go to Areas and add a spline on the top. Specify the spline, which we've created. We just need to disable the surface area. And now the grass grows only inside the shape of the spline. So I also wanted to mention that if there are strong elevation changes, in our case they aren't so strong, then you can enable not the XY mode, but the texture coordinates. Now in XY mode, the grass doesn't raise higher. Switch to UV and it spreads everywhere. Only in this case, all limitations in the area section stop working and we can't set anything here. So let's get XY back because we can use XY mode in our scene. The limitation worked, go to the next layer. Go to Surfaces section, remove the plane and add surface. And also limit the spline. and uncheck on. Okay, it works. Go to the third layer. In the surfaces section, remove plane and add our surface. And limit the spline. Just add a stone. Done. We've added everything. Now let's run interactive and check how good everything worked out and how it all looks. So make sure to turn on some lighting. I connect an HDRI map. There, not a big deal. Okay. So now it remains to run the interactive and see what we have. It takes a while to load, so I showed you the way to set force pack in a separate scene and then transfer it to our working scene. Because if we set it right here, everything would be much slower. So generally it's good, the only thing is to lower the HDR map exposure, otherwise everything's very overexposed. Let's specify the grass. And I think we did pretty good. Wild grass, there's some bald patches, some stones, lower grass. This is exactly what we need. So let's reduce the exposure. And we've got a good result. I hope my explanations weren't too difficult because the Forest Pack plugin has a lot of functions, so many tools, and it may be too confusing at first. I showed you the basic settings, which you can use. Forest Pack gives great opportunities for creating a realistic landscape. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson.